The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading. Well, let's take a look at Monday's market action as the dust settled. A little bit of green in soybeans and bean oil. I'd say overall, corn and soybeans worked off the lows of the session. We had some pressure, though, in the wheat markets, maybe tied to weather, and a decent start to the week in the cattle futures as well. Let's talk about it. Joining us for analysis, John Heimberg with Total Farm Marketing. John, hope you had a great weekend. Really kind of quiet, I would say. Maybe some end of the month type of trades starting to work in here as we started the week on Monday. I think that, along with maybe the weather, probably the two biggest influences, especially on the grain side on Monday.
Yeah, that was probably a big part of it here going into the end of the month here. And first off, first notice day is coming up here on the 30th. So those May contracts needed to move around. I think that was some of the weakness we saw in the overnight part of the session. Plus add into that options expiration. So obviously there's some repositioning after, those assignments and those options come off the books here last Friday for those May options. So that gave us some of the weakness on the overnight session, plus just a lack of news out there right now on the bullish front. So it's just kind of easy for this market to want to gravitate lower. It was a little disappointing to see corn not get back to green today, even though we did finish off the lows. And, that demand pace continues to stay very strong for corn. We saw export inspections today towards the top end of expectations at just under 1.7 million metric tons. Again, just, as this market keeps anticipating that USDA is going to probably have to make another demand adjustment, maybe on that May report here in a couple of weeks. So we'll have to watch that. But that just wasn't enough today to outweigh the selling in that wheat market, as well as just that prospects of good planting pace coming out here in a little bit when that weekly crop progress report hits the wires.
It just feels like I think you kind of hit it. These markets are searching for the next story. That's kind of been the feeling I've gotten the last couple of days. We're really getting into planting season. Things have picked up quite a bit the last week or so in many areas. We're creeping farther north with that planting activity, and really just feels like that seasonality is at play, especially in corn and soybeans right now, just kind of chopping around ranges as we're waiting and searching for the next headline driver in these row crop markets, John.
I agree totally. Again, we're just missing that news, and we're getting into that window now where even, the sales pace, producers selling, those types of things slow down. So again, we're just going to be looking for something here to get this market fired up. The weather's in a good spot. I mean, obviously we got some wetness in some areas out there, but we'll see how things turn out here after this system goes through. It sounds like things are going to dry out for most people. And I do think people got more things done than people count on, in terms of working around the raindrops here this week. So, I've talked to quite a few producers that got a good portion of their crops in here, and, the rains just kind of missed them. So that's something we'll have to kind of keep watching as we go forward. But again, watching that planting pace number, I think that weighed on December corn today. I think that also helped out the beans a little bit here as well today. And then you got that soybean oil market, which is still one of the biggest factors out there. Giving that bean market some support, another good day in that bean oil market, again, on just the driving and that biodiesel usage. And that's going to be something that we're going to have to weigh here, is the price of bean oil versus the exportable bean. Here in the United States, we still need to crush a certain number of beans, and we still need that crop there. And if there's margins on the crush side of it, whether it's through bean oil or soybean meal, there's room for prices to get a little bit of lift. And that's kind of what we've been seeing in the soybean market lately, is just that demand for the bean oil, giving those front-end beans some support.
Well, there's a lot of rumor in the trade. I know the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, coming out on Monday saying that one of the first trade deals that is expected to be announced, I'll put that with air quotes, it could be with India. And there's been a lot of talk about expanding that market for biofuels, et cetera, and things of that nature. So you look at some of that headline news risk, and I think you make a valid point about bean oil. We saw as well on Monday the EPA issuing their E15 waiver, maybe not new news, but supportive nonetheless, I think, to the corn market. So just all in all, you look at that headline news picture, and it just seems like we have things there, but we don't have things there right in this window. So it makes it kind of a choppy risk management environment right now, John.
It does, I mean, there's little headlines out there, but none of them are strong enough to drive a market. They're more potential longer term things. Now, the E15 thing, in terms of them opening up that waiver, well, then you got to have the infrastructure to pump it in terms of being available to everybody, but at least it's out there. One of the bigger ones talking about that soybean oil too. Look at the export shipments that we've got for bean oil this year. So there's been some pretty good numbers there, well above our historical pace, and that's some of the factor driving that bean oil market again on the global scale, just to move towards those biofuels a little bit more. So again, this is just one of those windows where the market just doesn't want to go anywhere. Now, typically we get a little bit of strength here after first notice day. We're exhausting some sellers in the market too. Don't forget, it's also basis pricing window here for May basis contracts. Likely that had to be done today for people. So sometimes we get a nice little bounce off of days like that. Maybe that was some of the strength we saw later this afternoon, as this market did find at least a little bit of footing. I'm a little curious, though. We got to see what these planning intentions or the planning prospects are tonight. If, again, we get good going on that good planning pace moving on that December corn like we have been, that could break it through that 450 support, which we clawed back above today. Just on the pure prospects that maybe that acre number gets a little bit bigger when we get to that June report, just because the planning's going well, given the market prices that are out there, that we may see a few more of those corn acres come to be.
John Heimberg with us from Total Farm Marketing. And, thinking about this wheat market trade, John, more pressure there on Monday to start the week, I think maybe tied to weather. Something to think about, too. The wheat marketing year ends in May, at the end of May. And so we're kind of at that no man's land, so to speak, in these wheat contracts where a lot of the focus, I'd have to think, is really shifted to the later contracts here, right?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, go look at export inspections or export sales last week, and we had net cancellations on the old crop, and probably more of that transferring from old to new in terms of rolling some sales over. But you get inspections numbers today, 647,000 tons above expectations. That's a couple weeks in a row we've had good shipments on wheat, so that's good to see at least some product moving there. But today, again, it's all about the weather and that KC winter wheat crop, and that we just can't seem to get out of the way in terms of the new lows that have pushed us to, as we saw good rainfall come across a lot of those key areas. So the market's a little nervous that, again, obviously we're going to see a robust supply. That just keeps the lid also on that Chicago price as well today. So it was just a difficult day in the wheat market in general. At least it found some floor at the end of the day, but obviously the charts don't look very good at all right now in terms of the angle, in terms of the selling pressure in this market.
Let's go over to livestock. Cattle had a good day in futures. I got to wonder, though, we have New World screwworm rearing its head again here. The news over the weekend that Ag Secretary Rollins sending a letter to her Mexican counterpart basically saying, Mexico, we want you to step up or we could halt imports again by Wednesday. Have to think that if that does happen, that's going to give another jolt of life into this cattle market. John, what do you think?
Very well could. I mean, not much happened today in terms of, you would think there'd be some pricing going into that. The feeder market was relatively quiet today, but still firmer. Again, overall, we're still watching that cash trade come together at the end of the week last week after the market closed. Some pretty solid numbers in terms of cash trending higher. Throw in today a $5 jump in choice carcasses at midday. So that just at least puts a little meat back on the bone for the packer for that cash trade to continue. So we'll have to watch that this week. Now we're getting real close to the end of the April contract life. So that'll bring a little extra volatility in this week as April gets ready to fall off the books here in the next couple of days. So, right now, still like that cattle market. I mean, you got a pretty big discount of April to June. We don't have a whole lot of things changing in terms of the cash market from now to then. That June contract looks a little bit undervalued here. Wouldn't surprise me, though, if we get through this week, maybe we get a little bit of a correction again, just because, I was targeting around the 210 area on that June contract, and we're real close to that spot. Like I said, might be a spot we could just see some money move out and pull some money off the table again. If that's the case, that probably brings into a bit of a buying opportunity. But again, getting back to your main question, do we see these feeder cattle imports halt again? It will definitely bring some fire into that market, because already the competition at the cash level is high as it can be. From just talking to producers, there hasn't been any calm down in terms of that feeder cattle market for them to secure supplies for cattle for the pens.
How about that hog market on Monday? Kind of mixed and quiet. Didn't see much of note in the futures trade to start the week.
Yeah, actually a pretty wide range in terms of trade today. Sold it off hard to start the session, then we rallied back, and then we fell off again and finished where? Right smack in the middle. So it kind of feels like we're maybe building a range here, getting a little bit more sideways. Obviously, cash trade will be the driver going forward, so we need to watch how that plays out. Still think there's some value in that June contract, but all of a sudden the last couple of days here just feels like when we get over 101, it got a little bit expensive in terms of the trader's mindset. There is still a gap on the technical side up around 104, 105 on that June contract that may still want to get filled. But at least here in this window, this rally that we've had, maybe that's a place we see a little bit of a pause until we get some better direction. Again, watching what that summer trend is going to be in terms of cash and retails.
How about that dairy market trade, John? Just real briefly, any keynotes for you there as we close out the month?
That May contract had a heck of a run, got up to about that 1850-60 window and just kind of ran into a wall. We've seen cheese trade kind of calm down in terms of its aggressiveness. Feels like a spot here. If we can't hold this area, we got a chance to come back down, at least take a little bit more value out, maybe about the halfway point of that rally. And that was about a $2.20 run off the lows in that May contract. So maybe got out a little over its skis in that regard. So maybe we need to see a little bit of profit taking there. Biggest thing, though, I'd really like to see that June contract participated, kind of stayed back off that May. May rallied $2 plus, and June barely put $1 in. So is that June contract a little undervalued? We'll have to see, especially given that July contract 40 cents above it on the back end. So, these next few weeks as we get close to the end of the April contract and May gets into delivery, going to be real curious to see where that June contract wants to go. Feels a little cheap here, especially if we can stay solid with some of those demands on some of those products like cheese.
John, any final thoughts you'd mention or reiterate to folks here today on the show?
Again, I know it's busy time out there, but make sure you're staying on top of the marketing side. Feel free to reach out to people like myself and, just make sure you're having conversations in terms of what's going on in the marketplace. There's a lot of irons in the fire right now, but sometimes there's opportunities here, that could be in front of themselves. So again, just make sure you find a way to stay active. Feel free to give me a call and reach out if there's anything that you need.
If folks want to give you a call, reach out. I know a couple ways to get in touch, John. How can they reach you?
Give me a call, 800-334-9779. Shoot me an email at johnh@totalfarmmarketing.com. And don't forget that website, totalfarmmarketing.com.
Always good to hear from you, John Heinberg, Total Farm Marketing. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good. Have a great week.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. You can watch our latest interviews with top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. It's easy. Just go to youtube.com/@MarketTalkAg and hit the subscribe button. Or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.